Do you want to be on mute until you start speaking?
Right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone who's joined us so far. Welcome. We'll just leave it another minute or two for some more people to join, then we can get started. One more minute. Welcome, everyone. Great. Well, so yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. It's great to have so many people with us. So this is the next session of the Council of Foreign Chambers of Commerce in the UK's In Conversation with series, to which today we're delighted to be joined by Terry Scuoler, who's the chairman of the Institute of Export and International Trades. I'm now going to hand over to Eduardo Barachina, who is the president of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK, to give the opening remarks. I just wanted to quickly say as well that while Terry is speaking, if you have any questions for him, please do write them in the Q&A or the chat boxes, and Terry will answer those after he's finished speaking. Now over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and good afternoon to everyone. Just a warm welcome to the Council of Foreign Chambers of Commerce in the United Kingdom, and most notably to our speaker today, Mr. Terry Scuoler, Chairman of the Institute of Export and International Trade. For all of you who don't know much about the Institute of Export and International Trade, I think it is worth mentioning it's the professional membership body representing and supporting the interests of everyone involving in importing, exporting, and international trade. So we at the Spanish Chamber of Commerce are delighted to welcome you here, Terry. We're coming close to the end of our first year following Brexit, and of course, trade numbers have changed, and we are looking at them very carefully. For example, if we look at Spain, the total trade in goods and services between the United Kingdom and Spain was 32.4 billion in the 4 quarters to the end of first quarter 2021. And that means, in practical terms, a decrease of 34%, or around 17 billion from the 4 quarters before the end of first quarter this year. So these figures are not great. We will need to think about what was the real cause for them, and at the same time try to distinguish between Brexit and the pandemic. So this is an important point we have to bear in mind. As we all know, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement secure tariff-free trade for businesses trading between the United Kingdom and the EU. And one of the things we've been obsessed in the Chamber is to ensure SMEs, small, medium enterprises, know how to benefit from tariff-free trade. As we all know, this requires meeting certain requirements. And it's been extremely challenging, and I think it's the key just to ensure SMEs know exactly how to benefit from free tariffs. At the same time, we know the UK is gradually introducing a certification obligation for agriculture, food, and fishery products, which are essential for many Spanish companies. There is a new border operating model being implemented. And as we all know, it has been announced recently that the requirement for pre-notification of agricultural imports to the United Kingdom will finally be introduced on January the 1st next year instead of October the 1st. The same will happen with physical checks and other health requirements, which have been delayed to next year. I just want to conclude by just having 2 or 3 reflections, particularly for Terry. I'm wondering at times how the asymmetric nature of border controls facing exports and imports will impact on UK producers and whether that creates a competitive disadvantage. Secondly, I'm wondering if there's enough financial support from the British government to British exporters. And finally, a more intellectual reflection is, I welcome our guests to ask the questions later. A few years ago, commerce, trade was largely about manufactured goods and trade policy and tariffs. And now trade policy seems to be inevitably woven into a fabric involving national security, human rights, the environment, corporate responsibility, currency wars, and European values here in the EU. So things have changed. The mindset, the rules of the game have changed. And I leave it here just by saying, again, thank you, Terry, for joining us today. There's a lot to talk. There's a lot. We're privileged to have the chairman of the Institute of Export International Trade with us. And I do encourage everyone just to listen carefully. And of course, feel free to ask any questions to Hannah. Thank you very much.
Okay, my own now, is it mine? Juan, are you going to say a few words or do you wish me to start?
We can't hear you. Perhaps if you could mute and unmute.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
My name.
I'm afraid we can't hear you again, Juan. Juan, we can't hear you. Juan, we can't hear you. Okay. Juan, we can't hear you speaking.
Juan, do you want, Hannah, you want to give the floor to Mr. Scuoler?
Yeah, I think Terry, perhaps it's best if you just speak, if that's all right. I'll try and get over to Juan. What's happened?
Try and get hold of Juan. Eduardo, Hannah, many thanks indeed. And just a pity we can't hear Juan Botin, but sometimes technology does let us down. Eduardo, you covered a significant number of very, very important issues in your introduction there. Let me address at least some of them in the next 15, 18 minutes or so. And I think let me start from the fundamental proposition that mutually beneficial international trade is a force for good. Very important word there, by the way, and that, of course, is mutually, or two important words, mutually beneficial international trade. It creates economic growth and job creation. It surely reduces geopolitical tension across the globe. And I think the other huge statistic, one of few statistics I will use, that international trade has over the last 30 years or so taken in excess of 1 billion people out of poverty. The United Kingdom has always been part of that global trade ecosystem. And I'll voice my words perhaps with a starting point from UK and its priorities, and then of course expand them. Those times have changed, however, and not just for the UK, but for the rest of the world. And going back some years, in 1950, the United Kingdom was responsible for 11% of global exports. We have now seen that decline to between 2 and 3% in 2020. Now, our exports have increased, and therefore that says a lot about the changing dynamic in the globe and the countries that make up this wonderful, wonderful world of ours. It's also an interesting fact that since 1998, the United Kingdom has always suffered a trade deficit, an overall trade deficit, a major deficit in goods, but of course, backed to a degree by a very strong positive in trade of services, where the UK is a competitive strength. But please, make no mistake that since 1998, the UK has always recorded a trade deficit. That said, the United Kingdom is still the 6th largest exporter in the world and nudging France and Japan to be in fourth place in 2019 with roughly £700 billion worth of exports. Global challenges abound. Now, even before the pandemic, what we were seeing was a rise in protectionism. That rise in protectionism was in the main driven by the United States and Chinese competitiveness. And in 2019 alone, it reduced the volume of international trade by $700 billion. Sadly, there are no signs of this challenge, this tension between the US and China abating. But what we have seen since the appointment of President Biden as US President is that we have seen at least the messaging, the heat, the tension, the rhetoric, as we would call it, of that exchange abating to some degree, or at least being toned down. And I think that is welcome. The other element, of course, of protectionism is what we're seeing as increased dumping, as we would call it. And I have to say, and it is factual, I do not mean this in any way unduly challenging, but if there is one culprit in our great global ecosystem of trade violation, that is probably China. And as we look at the moment of the 33 or so trade violations being examined by DG, by the Commission in Brussels in terms of trade violations, some 2/3 of those 33 trade violations in the main dumping are, of course, allegations, only allegations, I would say, but allegations against China at the moment. The COVID pandemic, of course, has been particularly damaging, as Eduardo said, or indicated in his introduction. Described by the WTO as an unprecedented disruption, it took about $2 trillion worth out of the global trade levels in 2020. Interestingly, that was a reduction of about 5% in merchandise and goods, and over 20% in the global trade of services. Services are the first to be hit, one could argue. I am delighted to be able to report that we're seeing a pickup now in global trade, but there are significant number of legacy issues over that. Supply chains globally have disrupted, and we'll be seeing that, Eduardo, why not only in our countries, but in many other countries around the world. Supply chain disruption is a major factor here. And of course, freight charges. It gives me no pleasure to report that the global container freight index has risen by over 500% in the last 18 months. And that freight index of cost and price continues to rise. The impact, of course, on international trade has been different across many different countries. I mentioned China a few moments ago. The impact in China, interestingly enough, was much smaller than many other nations, including us in Europe and indeed in North America, for example. They experienced a very strong recovery, due partly, of course, to their very strong domestic market and still a very strong international demand for goods. It is a huge domestic market, as we know. The other big issue here is because of the spread of the pandemic from China to other parts of the world, China was able to open its supply chains and open its market much sooner than perhaps we were in the UK, or indeed our friends, other friends around the world, particularly, of course, in the EU, where the pandemic has had a very serious effect. What has been the impact on the United Kingdom? It has been severe, but once again, as Eduardo said in his introduction, it is difficult to untangle what that severity has been due to the pandemic and due to the United Kingdom leaving the EU, i.e. Brexit. We clearly saw a very large drop in our exports in the early part of 2020, with a drop in services of about 25% and about a 14% drop in our export of goods. That fall in services is particularly harsh on the UK economy because, of course, it is a very competitive, it is an area of competitive strength for us. And not surprisingly, I suspect in the nations of those countries looking into this talk today, it was associated with transport, travel, associated services such as insurance, caused, of course, by very serious lockdowns and bans on international travel. In terms of Brexit, we started the year in the UK in a very challenging mode. Overall exports in January to the EU were down, I beg your pardon, globally were down about 41%, and that was driven by a very severe fall in the EU, fall of 29%. A very difficult start to the year. Was that due to challenges? Was that due to difficulties of understanding the trade agreement with the EU? Was it due to the pandemic? I don't know if I can answer that question fully in terms of trends and figure management. Equally, we saw a very strong pickup in February and March. Perhaps that downside in the early part of the year was due to measurable stockpiling, stock holding in the run up to the end of 2020, in anticipation perhaps of the risk of the EU leaving, the UK leaving the EU. In fact, that risk has materialised, as we all know, on the 1st of January. February and March, as I say, saw a strong recovery. And by June of this year, our exports to the EU were above the level of pre-pandemic. Now, what that tells us going forward, I think I will leave it to you and your analysts to resolve. I cannot leave the concept of the UK and the EU without mentioning the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Northern Ireland Protocol is a byproduct, rightly or wrongly, it is a byproduct of our Prime Minister's Get Brexit Done. And of course, whether it is a positive or a negative byproduct, well, that remains to be seen. But I do fear it is a negative byproduct. It establishes a border down the Irish Sea, leaving Northern Ireland in the EU single market, of course, and in the customs union. It is causing significant difficulties between mainland UK and Northern Ireland. And as once again, as our colleague Eduardo Baracchino mentioned, it is affecting particular sectors including food, drink, of course, and agricultural products. Time will tell as to what happens here, but it is difficult to see that this Northern Ireland Protocol has legs to continue into even the intermediate or medium-term future. It is politically very difficult. It creates great uncertainty for Northern Ireland and the population of Great Britain, and perhaps overridingly, it risks the issue of potential civil unrest. And those of us who remember the days of the 70s or 80s will remember how serious that violence and civil unrest of the 70s and 80s were. What are the opportunities for the UK in a global market? Well, we are now an independent trading nation. And as our government has set out, we are looking for a number of key international global alliances. One of those alliances, perhaps fortunately, unfortunately, was announced the other day in terms of defence strategy, which all of you will be aware of. However, sticking to trade, we have an ambitious trade policy. Firstly, to increase the intensity or density of our exports from 30% of GDP up to 35%. In essence, that is an increase of about £110 billion per year on our pre-pandemic trade valuation of about 700 billion pounds a year. Sadly, that was not the case last year, but it dropped down to about 580 billion. We have a number of sectoral strengths. They are pharmaceuticals, they are automotive, it is aerospace, and of course, when one mentions services, our key strength, amongst many, it has to be said, of course, is financial services, which is a key strength of the United Kingdom. We have the English language, which I think is regarded as a strength. We have the rule of law. We have a strong research base. And we also, of course, have in London a seat, perhaps a global seat going forward. One can challenge that, of course, post-Brexit, but still a very strong global seat, of course, in access and the raising of capital to support businesses. The rollover of the trade agreements is a significant achievement. It would never happen, many people said to me in the run-up to Brexit. It will take 9 or 10 years to roll over a fraction of the trade agreements. We have rolled over 67 of them, some of them with improvements, some of them with straightforward rollover. And of course, those rollovers and the new agreements are now better designed to match UK industrial strategy and of course, wider wider UK economic strategy. That ambitious plan is supported by investment in trade envoys, parliamentary trade envoys, and knocking the door of 400 new, relatively new, international trade advisors, covering about 76 countries globally. Relatively new, still to be tested and tried, but nonetheless an important investment, and I hope they succeed. We've also got a strong, what used to be called an export guarantee service, now UKEF. It now trades in some 60 local countries around the world. And it was nominated the best global export agency over the last 3 years. Still much to be done, but nonetheless, the investments that it makes, some £12 billion worth of support last year, are surely a step in the right direction. The UK's new global tariff is also, of course, a step forward. It takes over from the common external tariff of the EU. And of course, it was announced in May of last year. It is without a doubt a simplification. It takes about £30 billion a year of subcontract goods out in terms of tariff-free subcontract goods into the UK supply chain, saving, of course, British prime contractors and importers money as it does so. It simplifies about 6,000 product lines. No longer will biscuits or cakes or some form of staple food be characterized in a series of sub-definitions. So it simplifies much of that. It removes all nuisance tariffs below 2% and rounds down those perhaps which are fractionalized. 2.5% and a tariff becomes, for example, 2%. The aim is to have 60% of UK imports, almost immediate effect, tariff-free, according to the definition of the World Trade Organization. So what are the opportunities for the United Kingdom in a post-Brexit environment? In terms of trade, we must adhere to, we must continue to value our very close partners with whom we have existing strong relationships. United States, 15% of our exports and a similar number of imports. I look at our EU friends and partners. I look at Ireland, I look at France, I look at Netherlands, 6% of our exports. I look at Germany, taking about 8 to 9% of our exports, with similar strong import flows. They're relationships that not only historically we value, we currently value, and I sincerely hope that notwithstanding Brexit, we will continue to value and honour those relationships going forward. With 90% of the global economy, growth of the economy coming from outside Europe, then we as a nation, and should many of my colleagues looking in today, will be looking clearly at those areas of growth. Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, growing markets, growing so-called middle-class populations, which are key to our development and your development as a nation. I would say that this is about mutual trade. There is no point simply regarding these markets as export markets. Those days have gone. This is about mutual trade, importing as well as exporting. I think the recent agreement with Australia, albeit modest in terms, gives us a link to the comprehensive trade partnership, of course, with the 10 other, i.e. the 11 in total, Pacific Rim countries, which clearly Britain has applied to join. I think that that link with Australia may well facilitate membership of that CTPP and the other 10 countries of which we're looking to work with, although 5 of them are already part of trade deals that we have. And then, of course, the big question, does that Pacific Trade Partnership lead the UK any closer to a potential trade deal with the United States? Time, ladies and gentlemen, will tell. A word on services before I perhaps close and just take questions. The UK, in the main, is a service-related economy. Some 81% of our gross national product is, of course, gross domestic product, and indeed gross national product, is, of course, on services. It is an area of significant strength to us. And of course, it has been particularly hard hit over the last 18 months or so. The key sectors, key industrial or service sectors here, perhaps not surprising to many of you listening in here, are number one, financial services. Very, very strong and important for the UK economy. But financial services include broking, they include insurance, they include reinsurance. And when you look also at technology, IP transfer, when you look at architecture, when you look at insurance, when you look at transportation, one looks at travel, then I think the whole depth and breadth of our service sector is very, very strong and needs to be nurtured. Interestingly, in some of the rollover trade deals with the former EU trade deals, there is now provision, for example, with Switzerland, with Japan, with Israel, certainly also, of course, with Australia, provision for trade in services with those agreements. And I think also, without in any way being disparaging to our trade partners in the EU, we are now an independent trading nation. And I think when I look, for example, the EU trade deal with Japan, the UK had 7 designated products in that trade deal. We were competing, of course, not unreasonably, with the French and Camembert, with other aspects of other designated products, the Dutch with cheese and so on. In the Japanese agreement that we signed independently of the EU, there are more than 70 designated protected trade products by definition, by designation in that trade deal. And I think it gives greater scope for UK producers and manufacturers. I think that financial services alone accounted in 2019, the last year I have figures for in excess of £60 billion worth of our exports, with a surplus of £41 billion. Clearly important, as I mentioned. Is there a threat to the City of London in terms of financial services? Yes, clearly. I and our government, more importantly our government than me, recognise that threat. But to my colleagues who've registered and are listening to this, I think I fear that the opportunity is not to our colleagues in Dublin or Paris or Frankfurt or Amsterdam. I fear that if the City of London loses its strength and position, it will lose it to New York and not to our friends and colleagues across the channel in the EU. Hannah, Eduardo, Juan, I will pause on that note and take as many questions as I can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Terry. That's great. Covered a lot of really good points there. But yeah, if anyone, we'd really love to answer all of your questions now. It's great that so many of you have joined us today. So I've just written another message in there too. So just so people can see where the chat is, and please do write any questions in there, or there's also the Q&A box. It's really whichever you prefer. So you can start to write those in now. Yeah, okay, well, so sorry, Terry. I'm
just trying to look for the questions, that's all.
Okay, well, yeah, through the Q&A as well. So, okay, a question we've had to get started is, do you think that the UK is still viewed as a prosperous manufacturing nation, or it's more services?
Thank you to the questioner. It is a question I am often asked, and I think while the UK's share of global manufacturing has gone down, of course it's gone down in many other countries relative to the rest of the world, whether it be even our that industrial machine that we call Germany, whether it be France, the Netherlands. Relatively, our share of global manufacturing has gone down. We're still the 9th or 10th largest manufacturer in the world. We still have some very potent, very powerful world-leading sectors. But I do have to say that this needs to be worked on. I regret, as an advisor to many businesses, I regret that perhaps we lost our way in the 1970s and 1980s, and many of our businesses were hollowed out as we sought to be more service-oriented than we were manufacturing goods-oriented. Yes, I think we did lose our way to a degree in the 70s and 80s. We have come back measurably since then, 9th or 10th largest in the world, but my goodness, the concept of R&D, industrial investment, skills, training, and I could go on, all play a part in making sure that we hold our position to do so.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you very much. All right, another question from the Q&A we've had is, what do you think the main threats to the expansion of trade are in the next few years? Do you think China is often viewed as a threat or an opportunity?
Hannah, Eduardo, Juan, you would not forgive me unless I gave an honest answer to this question as I and indeed many of my colleagues here in the UK see it. There's clearly huge geopolitical tension, not just in the Pacific Rim, but of course around the world more generally, caused to a large degree by Chinese expansionism. I mentioned during my talk that of the 33 trade violations being investigated by the EU, 2/3 of them emanated, of course, from China. Dumping, as most of your colleagues listening in will know, is effectively where a country puts product on the marketplace in terms of international trade at below the cost of manufacture. And there is significant evidence that China, with government support, is doing just that. Now, that is an aspect of industrial policy. It's an aspect of trade policy. There's a wider set of issues here around geopolitical tension and, of course, military tension as well. I am not perhaps qualified to answer the questions around that tension. It saddens me to see that tension, particularly in the South China Sea. It saddens me to see some form of significant tension between our own government here, Chinese support for our energy sector, investment. I chaired a panel some couple of months ago with a very senior Chinese individual. What I would say to my colleagues, both here in the UK and the EU, there does not appear to be much sign of China easing its set of policies and strategies, whether that be in civil rights, human rights, and or trade or other strategic policy.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. We've had plenty more questions come in now, so thank you everyone for that. Another question we've had, Terry, is someone has asked, how will Brexit contribute to making the UK a more successful exporter if some of the most successful exporters are EU members and it never seemed to have stopped them from making it a success? For example, Germany. I think, in your opinion about that?
There is a very important fact here. Of the top 10 export markets that we have in the UK, 5, depending on the figures, 6 of them are in the EU. We value those trade links enormously. We are tied to the UK, to the EU, I beg your pardon, in so many different ways. Now, I know that the EU, I operated at some senior level in Brussels for a number of years. I know the frustration that many EU members have got about the UK leaving. But you know, Hannah, to my colleagues, we were never a fully engaged, emotionally, managerially engaged member of the EU. We have taken a democratic decision to come out. The questioner quite rightly says, well, will we be better off out than we were in? That, I think it is too early to say one way or the other, but the decision has been taken. And I think if I had a challenge to the EU, and I witnessed it at first hand, it is clearly a democratic organization with some challenges around that democratic excellence in terms of the Commission, I feel. It is a bureaucratic organization. The opportunity is there for Great Britain, the country I love, to be independent, to make the best way in the world, while valuing those relationships that we have. I can't help but say that perhaps the announcement from the US, Australia, and the UK in the last 72 hours may not have helped that relationship, but surely in the long term, this is something we can work together. I would not be sitting here as chair of the Institute if I did not believe that we could do it, and we could do it better, because we have to do it better.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. So yeah, that was kind of a question about Brexit making the UK a more successful exporter. A question we've received that's quite similar that I wonder if you have anything you'd like to add, is someone's also asked what substantial trade benefits that you really think are as a result of Brexit for the UK. If there's just anything you'd like to add onto what you've already said.
I think it's got to be, as I mentioned, the independent trade relationships that we have, or rather that we now have and will have going forward. I think that the two examples I did choose carefully in the short speech that I made. I think that with enormous respect to our colleagues in the EU, arranging something that best fits 28 member countries is clearly very difficult. With the best will in the world, there will be winners and there will be losers in any form of agreement or deal that Brussels and the Commission agree. That surely is simply a fact. I think I look to Britain to secure those independent trade relationships, protecting, yes, and I use the word deliberately, protecting some of those sectors in the UK that need to be protected, removing tariffs where we can to facilitate cheaper and more competitive prime contractor output, and designation of product, and of course, something that did not happen in the EU. Through no fault of the EU, we were all part of it, but every single EU trade deal was a deal for goods, not for services. And developing the trade and services is a key part of our future strategy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Terry. Someone else has written, they've written it's good to listen to you speaking as always, and they've asked if you have any initial views on the House of Commons International Trade Committee on UK export finance. I suppose it was a report that was published yesterday, if you're aware of that. if you have any comments about
it. Hannah, I dislike it when people start to waffle about that which they do not know. I have to admit, I have not yet read that report, and it would be wrong of me to make a comment. So on this issue, I apologise.
Okay, no problem at all. All right, well, thank you. I'm just having a look at then some of the other questions that have come in. So the British and Colombian Chamber of Commerce in the UK, which are key members of the CFCC, they've asked what type of partnerships does the Institute of Export offer to chambers to support and enhance exports? I presume, she's probably referring to both international chambers of commerce like ours, and also kind of national ones as well. Of course, there's a big network of those across the UK, for example.
I value your organisation immensely. I value my own organisation, and there's a dreadful word here to our question. It's called awareness. But speaking clearly as someone who understands the UK market, probably when I look at the services that our government offers, then only about 50% of businesses, business leaders are aware of those services. And therefore, organisations like my own Institute of Export and International Trade, the services of your own Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK, the other chambers of commerce, commerce is plural, then offer a huge service, not only in raising the awareness of opportunities in one another's countries, but helping to facilitate the exploitation, if that's the right word, of those opportunities by making them public, by holding events, by networking, by sharing information. And then more than that, once one of your companies or one of the companies from Colombia is aware of an opportunity, both in terms of import and or export, then of course you operate helplines in many cases to actually help them with paperwork, with processes to deliver that. So please, this is a critical part of the international trade ecostructure, and I value it, and I've seen it at first hand.
Wonderful, thank you, Terry. Thank you. Okay, another question we've had is, what do you think are going to be the main competitive drivers of trade in the short term, moving forwards?
This is an interesting one, and at the moment there's a tendency, perhaps, to look back, not surprisingly, pre-pandemic, pre-Brexit, and learn the lessons from that. And I think that is the issue here: learning the lessons from pre-pandemic, pandemic, Brexit, and so on. But when I look at our own government policy and I look at government policies around the world, and Eduardo once again raised probably the most two critical issues that I think our government needs to look at, and to be fair, is looking at. One, of course, is that the nature of international trade
Yeah, I think we've just lost Terry there. Hopefully he'll come back shortly. Terry, if you can hear us, it looks like your screen has just crashed there.
Will change in line with the need for ability, taking people out of poverty. Environment has to move much more in favour of demanding need to change what we do and how to think that we are going to see.
Hi everyone, sorry, please bear with us for a minute. I think we've just lost Terry. Hopefully he'll be coming back in very shortly. So sorry, just please bear with us for a couple of minutes. Hi Terry, I think you're on mute, but you're back again.
Hannah, thank you. I think you've got me back, is that correct?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we've got you back.
Yes, thank you. The first issue there, of course, was about climate change, the environment, its protection, and I think that will be a significant element of developing future trade. The other comment, of course, Eduardo made, and he was absolutely right to do so, and that, of course, is about developing SMEs. They're a huge benefit for good. They employ, what in the UK alone, about 5 million companies, employing the greater majority of the workforce here in the UK. And the other issue is, and I don't think it was mentioned in the introduction, is if we cannot use international trade as a means of continuing to take not just millions, but potentially billions of people out of international poverty, then we as a nation, the EU in totality, and other measurable trading blocs will not be doing our job here. And when I look at some of just those opportunities around the world, and we've seen them all on our television screens, that I think must be an opportunity.
Fantastic, thank you Terry for that. All right, moving on to some other questions we've got. Another question we've had is which countries or geographical areas generally do you see as being of higher growth or targets for British exporters moving forward?
I think I covered this very much in outline and obviously the time that was available. Every part of the world, I think it's quite challenging to focus on a specific area, but you used the term economic growth. And therefore, when I look at the countries of South America, Central South America, I look at Sub-Saharan Africa, I look at Southeast Asia, this is where we're going to see huge growth going forward, often measurably double-digit growth. And I use the analogy, I think, of where we were with China 20 years ago. These countries are not just export markets for the so-called West to produce and deliver goods to. They are becoming supply chains in their own right. They are becoming not just supply chains, but manufacturers in their own right. They're becoming exporters in their own right, and they're becoming technologists in their own right. And that is what I alluded to in my term mutual trade. But straightforward answer to your question, those opportunities where we've got 90% of global growth, i.e. non-EU, I think are real priorities for the United Kingdom and many other countries. Now, I've got to say this because I mean it, let us not turn our back also on old and valued partners. So let us sell more to Germany, let us sell more to the Netherlands, let us sell more to the French, let us sell more to Van Boten in Madrid, and keep the old partnerships going as well.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, another question we've been asked. You of course spoke at the beginning during your talk about the Northern Ireland Protocol and everything that's been happening in Ireland, Northern Ireland there. Someone has asked if you could maybe perhaps expand on how you think the situation in Ireland will develop or where it will end up in terms of trade or more broadly, or perhaps if not what you hope will happen with that as well.
That is a tough one. The Northern Ireland Protocol is a short document. It is only 56 pages long. The annexes, the 280 or so annexes to that document, probably call up many tens of thousands of pages of rules, regulations, and protocols, i.e., Northern Ireland sitting in the EU to all intents and purposes, and it is a region of the United Kingdom. One could argue, and one does argue, that our Prime Minister Boris Johnson should not have agreed to this. He did agree to it, he signed up to it, and he signed the document. So we are where we are. Therefore, the issue is, can this be amended by agreement with our friends and partners in Brussels? I hope it can. If it cannot be amended with our partners in Brussels, then I'm going to stick my neck out and say that the UK will have no choice but to break certain protocols within that agreement to prevent potential civil unrest, and do so before the 4-year review period, in terms of consensus period, which is called for in 4 years. 80% of our member companies in the Institute are complaining about difficulties of trading with Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland to GB in line with the protocol. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm not going to answer my own question. There is evidence that perhaps, or is there evidence that EU bureaucrats or British bureaucrats in terms of border checks are being more rigorous than, for example, border checks coming in from non-EU countries into EU? Now, there's a view that there are more rigorous checks than is needed. Equally, we're also picking up views that we in the United Kingdom, if we do not cross a T or we do not dot an I, then the paperwork is incorrect and it must be rejected. I offer those views because that is what we're picking up. I do have to say, I am worried about this situation continuing, and I sincerely hope that our negotiating partners in London and our partners in Brussels can find some compromise solution.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. And yeah, thank you for all these questions you've answered so far. I know we've had quite a lot coming in. We just got some more. Another question is, I think you touched on trade barriers earlier, but someone's just asked again to kind of reiterate what you think are the main trade barriers for trade with the UK, internationally speaking.
It's an interesting one again. There are 3 main trading blocs in the world, and they are clearly identified: China, the United States, and the European Union. When those 3 major trading blocs have difficulty with one another, whether it be imposing tariffs, whether it be ad hoc, to and fro elements of protectionism, then smaller trading nations such as the UK and many others have difficulty here. Now, the judge and jury of this system of this global rules-based system, of course, is the World Trade Organization. And there is a set of rules-based regulations that comes out of the WTO. Now, those 3 trading blocs, and there are others, have some historical track record of not adhering to WTO rules. Therefore, as long as those 3 trading blocs, and particularly China and the US, and remember, we're all parts of supply chains into those 2 great trading blocs, have difficulties, then protectionism will remain, and protectionism is likely to increase. And of course, on the back of US-China protectionism, it has affected many other nations, and we're seeing generally an increase in protectionism and barriers to trade around the globe. And of course, that started measurably before the pandemic in early 2020.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, well, we just had a final question that's come in, although if anyone's got any final ones as well, please, you can still write them in the chat or the Q&A. Another one we've had is, do you see a time in the future where total UK service exports will eclipse the value of product exports?
Yes, yes, I do. I'm just doing a bit of research for today's talk. I looked at the 2020 figures, and UK service exports were 46% of the total, and manufacturing was, of course, the balance of 54% of the total. Our manufacturing exports are growing. The total package of exports in 19 was 690 billion, just below the 700 billion sterling pounds that I mentioned, having dropped back, of course, some 14% last year for reasons that we all understand. And of course, service exports are increasing measurably faster than exports of goods. So yes, I don't think I could put a time scale on it, but I see UK service exports increasing in total, or exports of goods going forward. That said, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to see this as a relative problem, i.e., our exports in goods increase. Of course, it's the export in services that increase even more.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Terry. Well, yeah, that's all the questions that we've had. So thank you so much for sharing your insight with us and your opinions and for answering all those questions. I know we received quite a lot. We were, yeah, in this kind of time after moving out of the pandemic and after Brexit, it's really interesting to hear your thoughts and opinions, and especially with such an international audience having joined us today with people from all over the world or with business interests all over the world or operations. So thank you very much, Terry. We very much appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you everyone, yeah, for joining us this Council of Foreign Chambers of Commerce in the UK webinar. And yeah, please keep updated. Please keep an eye out for future webinars that we'll be planning on behalf of the organisation as well. But thank you all for joining us today, and thank you once again, Terry.
Thank you much indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.